Welcome to the BB Toolbox. In this tutorial I will be showing you how to create a simple database application login system. Now it's important to note that I'm not talking about the database security which is actually used to connect to our database through our connection string in our application. Rather, I'm talking about a managed table of users that allows you to log into a specific application type, whether it be some sort of business system or, in this example, a forum structured database. And that's what I'm using here is a very simple SQL Express 2008 database. And I have a table called members that stores my database or my application users. So I have my username and password and various other fields related to each user or member of this forum structure. So that's what we're going to be doing. This tutorial does assume that you already have a functional database that you have access to and can connect up to it with your application. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to create a new project in Visual Basic, and I'm going to make sure that's a Windows Forms application, and I will call it SQL App Login. We'll say OK. And that will generate our project template. And from here I'm going to add a few simple form controls. I'm going to start with a GroupBox just to kind of keep things looking nice. I'm just going to make that right here. And I'm going to change the caption text in that by going to my Properties dialog on the right. And I'm going to change that to User Login. And I'm going to grab a text box for the username field. Excuse me. And I'm going to change the properties of this text box. I want my max length to be the same as what is defined for my username field in the database. I don't want you to be able to enter a username that is larger than the actual database field that I'm comparing it to. So my database structure shows a varchar value of 30, so I don't want to exceed 30 for my username field, so I'm going to say max length 30. And that limits it to 30 characters that the user can enter. And I'm just going to call this text box txt user, and also going to add a label to that. Just going to put that right over here, and I'm going to change the caption text on that to username, just like so. Alright, now I'm also going to want one for the password, so I'm just going to copy both of these by clicking and dragging on my form and selecting them both. And you can do a Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste, or you can just right-click and copy and repeat to paste. And I'm going to change the caption text on the second label to password. And excuse me, looking at my database, my password is also varchar 30, so I want that to be 30 characters as well. It should have copied the properties of the initial text box. So if we look at our max length, it is still 30, so that's good. I'm going to change the name of this text box to txt pass. Okay, simple enough. Next up, I'm going to grab a command button to initiate the login process. I'm just going to drop that down here and kind of center that up however you like. And I'm going to change the name of this button to CMD login, and I'll just change the caption text on that to login. And let's go ahead and add one more group box. Gonna drag that down there. And this is where I'm going to display my user information that will it will display in here if we successfully log into our application. So I'm going to change the text on that to just the user profile. How about that? And I'm going to go ahead and drop a text box in there as well to show a few additional fields from the user's information in my member table. So I'm just going to create that text box in there. I'm going to set this to multi-line equals true in the properties. And that will allow you to expand it down. And I can change a couple other properties here. I'm going to set it to read-only equals true, so the user can't modify that. And I'm going to change the border style to fixed single. There we go, that looks pretty clean. And I will change the text box to probably just txt user info. Easy enough to reference. I'm going to go ahead and save my application. And so, looks like we're ready to begin actually coding on this guy. What I like to do at this point is create a class to contain all of our SQL database information, controls, and methods. It kind of keeps your main form clean. What I'll do is I'll right-click in my Solution Explorer on my project, and I will say Add Class. And I like to call this class SQLControl. And that, click Add, and it will generate a new class for us. And here we're going to need access to the system data SQL client. So we'll say imports system.data.SQL client. And next up, we're going to need just a few variables to manage our SQL connection and commands. So I'm going to say private SQLCon as new SQL connection. And I'm going to just add my new parameters directly to this new SQL connection rather than establishing it on a new instance of our class. So I'm going to say with, and then you open a curly brace, you can add properties to it. So I'm going to say dot connection string, and this is where we will define our connection string that will allow us to actually connect up to our database. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish that and close it off and begin creating our connection string. So the first parameter of our connection string is going to be the server name. Okay. So we say server equals, and you're going to need the server name, instance, or IP address that you have access to. I'm using an instance server here, and it's on an old, very old slow box that I call Minecraft, and the instance name is SQL Express. So that's what I need to point to here. So I'm going to say Minecraft / SQL Express. And separate each parameter with a semicolon. So the next parameter we need is a database pointer. So I'll say database equals, and then the name of my database. And again, looking back at my SQL server here, the name of the database I'm connecting to is called SQL Apps. So just do SQL Apps, and you'll want the name of your database there. And now we need to provide authentication and user credentials to connect up to the database. And this is, again, not to be confused with your application login. So this is our actual SQL security login, and I'm using a user of SA. I'm using the basic system admin account for SQL Server, which is SA by default. And then you can enter your password as the final parameter by saying pwd equals and then your password. My password for this test database is just password1. And finalize that with another semicolon. Alright, and once you have your connection string formulated, we're going to need a couple more variables here. One is going to be our SQL command, and this is very important as it sends commands to the database. So this is where all of our queries and updates and things flow through. So I say private SQL cmd as SQL command. And finally, I'm going to make these ones public because I want to be able to access them from my main form. So if they're private, I won't be able to access them. And I don't really need access to these externally, but I will need access to my data adapter data set. So say public SQL DA as SQL data adapter, and public SQL DS as data set. So the data adapter will allow us to return the results from our SQL command and push them into and fill our data set. That's how that works. So now there's a few standard functions and subs that I like to create in my SQLControl class to sort of allow me to easily throw commands at my database and query them, test the connection and things like that. The first one I'm going to do is a public function. Remember, public makes it accessible from the outside from other classes like form1. And this function is going to be hasConnection, and I use this to test to make sure that I am able to actually get a connection to my database. If this fails, then I usually abort whatever commands I was going to throw at it. So I'll say public function hasConnection as a boolean. I just want it to return a true/false value. And inside of here we'll use a try-catch to make sure we smoothly catch any errors or exceptions that we have. And this is very simple. All I'm going to do is call my SQLCon, that's my SQL connection, and use the open method to open a connection to the database. If that is successful, then I will close that connection, SQLCon.close. Okay? And then I will know that I can successfully connect to my database with whatever my connection string is. So whether this works or fails has to do with your connection string and your connectivity to your database. If it's successful, then I want to return true. If it's not successful, I want to know why it failed. So I'm going to fire a message box with the exception message. So I'm going to do ex.message to capture any errors and throw them back at us so we know how to troubleshoot. So this is a very simple function. It just opens the database, and then if it's successful, then it closes it and tells me it's successful. Otherwise it fails and tells me why. So I can go ahead and go to my form, and let's double click on our login button here, And what we can do is test our connection to our database immediately. So I will say if, we're going to need an instance of our SQL Control class. We can't talk to our class unless we've actually created an instance of it. So in our form 1 variables, I'm just going to say private SQL as a new instance of our SQL Control class. Now we can play around with our SQL controls. So to call that, I'm just going to say SQL, or if SQL.hasConnection, that's our function that we created, equals true, then send me a message box saying success. Very simple test. And let's go ahead and launch our application here. And I'm going to say login. Sorry, it's very slow here. Like I said, I'm running my SQL server on a dinosaur, but it connected successfully. So I know that my application and my SQL control class, my connection string, is all working properly. Let's go ahead and generate a failure here. I'm going to just change my password to just password and see what happens. Login failed for user SA. Okay. I went ahead and I'm not sure. Oh, what did I do there? I must have messed up in my SQL control. Oh, you guys probably caught that before I did. Like, why is he setting that to true? If it fails, it was supposed to set it to false, so it thinks it was still successful. So if it's successful, return true, otherwise return false. Sorry about that. Apparently I can't talk and type at the same time. Login failed for user SA, and then it just goes out. So that's the nice thing about a try-catch, is that it allows it to crash gracefully but without dumping our application. Otherwise, it would have crashed and then dropped our application along with the error. So instead it returns back to the application, gives you a chance to switch things around and try other things before without crashing on you. Okay, so we know that's working properly. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and then jump back into our SQL control class. Now I want to be able, knowing that I have a successful connection to my database, I want to be able to, which I better fix here, sorry, set that back. I want to be able to fire queries at the database. So I'm going to create a sub to do this. I'm going to say public sub run query, and the query that I want to run is just going to be called query as a string. So I'm going to pass a string into my run query command, and then I'm going to do another try catch, make sure it tells me if it fails and doesn't blow up my app. So just like before, I'm going to use an open and close, so you can actually copy and paste these down here to save a few keystrokes. And once it's open, then we want to create a command. So to do this, I'm going to say create a command, and then SQLCMD. Try that again. SQLCMD equals a new SQL command. And a couple of parameters we need for our SQL command. First is going to be our query string, so we'll say query. And then we need a reference to our connection, SQLCon. Pretty simple. And once we're done with that, we want to be able to fill up our data set with information from the database, whatever's returned from this query. So I'm going to say SQL data adapter, whoops, sorry. There we go. Nice to keep notes. SQL DA, that's our SQL data adapter, equals a new SQL data adapter. And we're going to reference our SQL command, SQL CMD. And then we will create a new instance of a data set. So I'll say SQL DS equals new data set. That generates an empty data set container, and then we use our data adapter to fill that with the data that it returns from our SQL command. So we'll say SQLDA.fill, and then our SQLDS. Alright. So if that all worked out, then anything that we queried should be returned to this data set automatically. And of course, if it fails, we want to know why. So I'm going to say message box ex.message. And one thing that's important, if your query fails immediately, or even in the middle anywhere, we've already opened it. And if it fails, it's going to jump down and throw the exception and skip over the close. So we want to make sure that our database connection is closed, otherwise we won't be able to run more queries against it. So say make sure connection is closed. Then I'll say if SQLCon.state equals connection state open, then close it, SQLCon.close. So it's just a precaution. It's always nice to close the database, close the door after you leave. So if this is working, we should be we should be able to run queries against our database now. This means that we are ready to begin handling our user login. So if we jump back into our Form 1 code, I'm going to want to create a function, okay, to return a true/false, a Boolean value indicating whether the user was successfully authenticated or not. In fact, if the user's authenticated, then I want to return the authenticated user's username and store it in a variable here. So I can say private auth user as string. Okay, so by default that will equal nothing, and you can use this for further commands and stuff, kind of based upon your application design, whether it's a business system or whatever. Yeah, you may have a user that can do one thing but can't do another thing, or maybe you want to check and see if it's an admin user, or you know, things like that. So let's check and see if the user is authenticated. I'm going to come down here and create a private function, and I'm going to say is authenticated. You can name it something else if you want. It's all good. And I want to return a Boolean value, so I'm going to say as a Boolean. So first thing I'll do is check to see if there are any existing records in our data set. I'm going to say clear existing records. So I'll just say if SQLDS is not nothing. If it's not null, meaning that there is something in our data set, then go ahead and flush it out by calling the SQLDS, our data set, .clear. If you try running this clear without using this condition check, if your data set doesn't even exist yet, if it hasn't been created, and you try clearing it, then it's not going to be happy. It'll throw back an error at you. Okay, so now we're ready to create our authentication query. So to do this, we're going to call our SQL, our SQL Control class, .run query method that we created. And here's where we will enter our query string. So you need to be a little bit familiar with the transact SQL, at least select statements and whatnot. So I'm going to say select, oops, I'm trying to keep this even, select count username, and really you could just select the username or any other data that you wanted. I'm just going to use a user count. I want to count the records that match the username and password that are specified in our login controls, in our login box here. So if it doesn't return any records, we know there was not a successful match and the user should not be authenticated. Otherwise, if there is a match, then the user is successfully authenticated because a user and password combination had been found. So I'm going to call this as user count, and I'm going to drop down to the next line, do an ampersand and a underscore there, and I want to select it from the members table. If you can recall my database structure here, this is my members table, and these are the fields I have access to in there, the columns. So I'm going to be checking the username and password combination. Let's drop down a line, and add our filter. We'll say where the username equals, and then we use an open single quote, and then we have to close our string and add in the text that is in our text box. So txt user dot text. Okay. And then we concatenate on the rest of the string, open it up, put our ending single quote, and then a space, and then drop down another line. So where the username equals text. Now, in most applications, the username is not case sensitive, and it's important that we be able to run a case sensitive search when it comes to the password, because passwords usually are case sensitive. So we have to force the password to be checked in it, against what is typed in our password box, and it has to be case sensitive for security purposes. So we're going to also add and password equals open single quote and txt pass dot text, and close that single quote. And this is how we will set the password to check against the database as a case sensitive field. So what we're going to do is use collation. We'll say collate SQL underscore Latin 1 general CP1 CS AS. And I don't know what all of these little components mean, like CP1. This may be case sensitive, not sure what that is. Might be worth looking up. But what I do know is that this will cause it to check this field against the database as case sensitive. So it's very important. And then we will end our query there. And you can close off the run query with parenthesis end paren. So That will run our credentials against a database query. And if a match is found, it should return a value of 1, because there shouldn't be more than one unique key in your database. Shouldn't be more than one password combo. So it should return either 1 or 0. So here we'll say if SQL.SQL dataset .tables .rows 0, grabbing the first index in our tables and rows, and the item user count, you have to grab it by the name that you chose or by the field names that you use. So in this case we're returning user count, so that's the field I want to grab here. If that equals 1, then return true from our function. Otherwise, we'll say message box invalid user credentials. And we could throw a VB critical in there if we wanted. I'll just say login failed. Gotta be dramatic with your error messages, right? So if that is the case, then return false. Oops. So it's going to run the query against the database, check and see if the user password combination exists, make sure that the password is checked case sensitive, and if it returns an item and that item equals 1, then we know that the username password combination was successfully found, and we will return a true. Otherwise, we will return a message indicating failure and return false. So we can go back up to our login here. So we already know if we have a successful connection to the database. Now we want to know if the user is authenticated. So we'll say if is authenticated equals true, then set the auth user variable up here to be equal to the text in the username field. Alternatively, if you wanted to be more secure, you could use something like a user token that you could cause to expire in your database. I'm not going to get that in depth in this tutorial, so this just kind of keeps it simple. You could also have your username field expire after a certain time, so the user has to re-log in if they're inactive. There's a number of things that you can do to secure your application. That's all up to you. So here we could say message box login successful. Alright, so let's give this a try. Go ahead and run that. Oh, I didn't specify any values. Invalid user credentials. It is not happy. Okay. Now, something you'll notice here, typing in my password is going in as plain text. We don't want that for a password box, so that user does not exist. I'm going to jump back to my form and grab this password box and scroll down in your properties to use system password character and change that to true, and then it will hide your password as you type it. Login failed. Invalid user credentials. So let's grab some real credentials from the database and test them out. Oops. That's not what I wanted. I want this guy. I'm going to run a query here against my database. I'm going to say select star from members. Alright, so I'm just going to grab one of these randomly. I'm going to use Ambrosia21 here. Her password is I love code, capital I, capital L. So, first off, we'll try Ambrosia21, and her actual password is capital I, capital L, O-V-E, capital C-O-D-E. Look at that. The login was successful, and I typed in the correct case, capital I, capital L, O-V-E, and capital C-O-D-E, and so let's try typing in her I love code in lowercase. I love code. Look at that, invalid. So we know that our case sensitivity for the password is functioning properly. I can't fake the password or guess it if it's mixed case. So let's try another one. New admin was another one, and the password is this is good. Try logging in. Login successful. Alright, well, message box is kind of nice, but what if I want to, you know, show a little more information about the user indicating that they logged in? What I will do is jump back into my form code, and I will create a simple sub to grab the user's information. So I'm going to come down here at the bottom. I'm going to say a public sub or private sub, doesn't really matter, it's in our main form. Get user info. Okay, simple enough. And as before, we're going to run a query against the database. This time for user information. I'm going to say SQL dot run query. I'm going to create another select statement. I'm going to say select, and I want specific fields this time. I'm going to grab the username, website, the email address, and the last login date. And I'm going to drop down a line, tell it where to grab the information from the members table. And I want a filter on there. So I'm going to say where username equals open single quote, and instead of using what's in my text box, I'm going to use the authenticated user to run this query. So I'm going to say and auth user, and then I'm going to close that single quote, and that's it. I can close off my run query. And now what we will do is cycle through our records that are returned to our SQL data set, so, and return the values to our text box. There's a number of ways. Text box probably isn't the cleanest way to do it, but it works well enough for what we're doing here. You could store it in labels or list boxes, combo boxes, all sorts of, really any control that you want to store your information to. That's up to you. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to use this text box, and so what I will do is I will create a loop to loop through the results of this query in our data set by saying for each I as object. I'm going to return each value as an object. I've found that using an object variable seems to handle null values in our data sets better. If you try returning null values to strings, it'll often crash on you. So just a little pointer there. For each I as an object in our SQL data set, SQLDS dot tables 0. Always grab the first table. Dot rows. Okay. So for each item found in our rows, I'm going to return the values to my text box. So I'll say txt user info dot text equals, and I'm just going to format a string here. I'm going to say member with a member name and I dot item. And because we're using a generic object here, it's not going to actually show us the properties of our row item. So we have to just kind of know that they're there. Say item, and the name of our field, username. And then I'm going to add a line break. I'll just say VBCRLF, drop down. And then I want the website, the user's website. So I'm going to repeat this, I.item, oops. It wants to auto, IntelliSense is not being intelligent right now, so I'm just going to grab this, copy, paste it here. We'll simplify things anyway. Grab the website field from our query, and again VBCRLF, and let's just grab this line and copy and paste, drop down, paste, and this time I want the email. Let's say item email, and one final line. And we can get rid of the ending there, since it's the last bit. Last login, or I can say last active. And really what you would end up wanting to do probably is when the user successfully logs in, you could run that against your database and actually update this login, the last active date. Just a little thing to consider. Alright, I think we are ready to test this. Let's go ahead and just kick it off. And I'm going to grab Ambrosia again. Ambrosia 21. I love code. Login successful. It's not returning our value. Oh, probably help if I actually called our get info. So let's come back up here in our code. I have a message box telling me I was successful, but I never actually did anything after that, so I will say get user info. If we have a successful connection and the user is authenticated, then change our auth user to the text value here and get the user info. Alright, Ambrosia, don't let me down. I love code. Look at that. So it is successfully grabbing her information and populating the text box within. It's fantastic. You could, if you wanted, you could have an avatar link in your database, in your users table, if you wanted a user profile picture, and then you could bring that profile picture in and show it on the form, maybe up here in the corner or something. Since I've kind of showed you exactly what I wanted to show you in this video, I'm going to kind of leave it here, but if you wanted to do something like that, I could certainly show you how in the future. If this video is helpful to you, please share it, give me the likes and stuff. I really appreciate that. If you think anybody else will find it useful, then share it with them. Let's see. Mr. Admin. Sorry, I just want to play with my app a little. This is good. Oh, that's not his password. I was looking at the wrong records. The master. Oh yeah. Notice the information updated properly. Everything looks good. So that is how you create a login app. I hope this has been helpful. Leave me comments and whatever you like. I appreciate it. Thanks. I wish you all luck in your apps. Bye-bye.